Hello, welcome, and thanks so much for joining me for this session of Straight Chablis. My name is Maymata Aliyah. I'm a New York-based wine educator, and today our discussion is going to be about the Chablis Grand Cru wines. Over the last 6 sessions, I've had an opportunity to discuss a variety of topics pertaining to the Chablis wine region with a slew of wonderful industry friends and guests who've brought a lot of richness to our discussion. And today, as I mentioned, our topic will be about the Chablis Grand Cru and its 7 climats. The Chablis Grand Cru in today's market of rising wine prices, especially at the premium category, does remain a relatively affordable luxury. So it is often an overlooked category. And I hope that after today's discussion, we will bring a lot of much needed excitement to the Chablis Grand Cru. And I am privileged and honored to be joined by Christy Canterbury, MW, who will introduce herself in a minute. But Christy recently spent 9 days in the region, traveling around and tasting a lot of wines from the Chablis region. She is very, very familiar with Chablis. We are incredibly lucky to have her here today to share her thoughts and her opinions and her love for the Chablis wine appellation. And as usual, we will be tasting 3 wines to help flesh out the conversation a little bit. We'll be tasting 2 wines from the same producer, from the same vintage, but showcasing 2 different climats, and then a 3rd wine from a different producer and a different vintage. And I hope that by the time we conclude our discussion, you'll have just a small snapshot of the richness and diversity that the Chablis Grand Cru appellation can bring to your wine glass. So without further ado, please allow me to introduce Christy Canterbury, MW. And Christy, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your professional background? I know asking you to say a little bit is maybe difficult because you have such a wide breadth of experience in this industry. But as best you can, go ahead and please tell our guests a little bit about yourself.
May, thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure and an honor. I'm a master of wine. I currently write about wine, speak about wine, judge wines for magazines and competitions, and I buy for restaurants and private clients. And previously, I've spent a good amount of time in retail, buying in large stores for collectors here in New York, in Washington, D.C., and in Hong Kong. And I also spent a lot of time as corporate wine director for Smith Olinsky Restaurant Group and Culinary Concepts by Jean-Georges, running wine lists, cocktail programs, both domestically and internationally in big Starwood hotels. So that's a very quick recap.
That is an incredibly quick recap. Anybody who wants to learn a little bit more about what Christy has done, you can visit her website because it truly is very, very impressive. So I am really, really thrilled that you're here. We've known each other for a long time, but it's always wonderful to reconnect, even if it's on Zoom. So before we jump into our conversation today, I'm just going to give a bit of an overview about what our topic of discussion is today, which is the Chablis Grand Cru. So as people who've been joining us on this series know, I'm the big fan of maps. And so today I'm changing it up. I've got a close-up. Awesome. Look, you have a good one. I just have to print mine out. So I've got a printout of the Chablis Grand Cru. And for an awesome, actually, Krista, do you want to show where it is on that map?
Yeah.
Awesome. Look,
here we go.
That's cool. There it is. Okay. So here, I love that because you can see a couple of really, really important things about where it is. So it's pretty much right across the river from Chablis. So we've got Chablis town, right? And it's pretty much across the river. It's one continuous hillside stretch. Okay. So they're all connected. It is one hillside. It covers just over 250 acres. It's actually 252 acres. And the elevation goes between 328 feet up to 820 feet. You have beautiful orientation towards the river. You have a beautifully sunny location for that Grand Cru. We've talked about the Cameridian soils. Again, here we are in the land of Cameridian soils with a very high presence of those tiny oyster fossils that we've talked about. The one thing that I do want to mention, and I find that oftentimes it is incorrectly referenced as the 7 Grand Cru of Chablis. It is 1 Grand Cru and 7 climats. So with the climat, we have Blanchot, Les Clos, Volmure, Les Grenouilles, or Grenouilles, some people just refer to it, Vos Désirs, Les Preuses, and then Les Boucaux down here. All right. So this one continuous stretch, it's one hillside. On a label, you will always see the term Chablis and then the reference to the climat, and then the Grand Cru. And so even though we do have this one hillside, we do know, of course, it's all about the climat. It's all about the orientation. So in some cases, we have a bit more of a southwest exposure. In some cases, it's more of southeast exposure. In some cases, it's just due south. We have some variation in elevation between 328 feet to 820 feet. All of that is once again going to bring us back into this world of nuance where wine from Les Clos versus a wine from Blanchot, which we'll be tasting today, are going to give us very different expressions. So that's our brief recap of the Chablis Grand Cru hillside. And what I want to do now is start my conversation with Christy. As I mentioned, she has worn so many hats in this industry, but I wanted to see, Christy, in these myriad of roles that you have played. I'm guessing Chablis Grand Cru has always played a role. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, absolutely. Chablis Grand Cru is like Chablis itself, which is kind of the ports or the door to Burgundy coming from the north. It's an entryway into understanding Chablis and Grand Crus and Chablis Grand Cru. It's a lower price point, generally speaking, even though price points are creeping up all across the board for all wines in Burgundy. Certainly Chablis Grand Cru prices are creeping up more slowly than those from the Côte d'Or, but it's a more gentle price point. It is so it's whether it's on a restaurant list or on a store shelf, it's easier to have an opportunity to taste a Grand Cru wine from Burgundy that is very distinct.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the prices are creeping up a little bit, but they still are somewhat of an affordable luxury. Is that kind of fair to say?
Yeah, they absolutely are. And I do lament a bit that you used to be able to get, even just 3 or 4 years ago, you used to be able to get a Grand Cru off a shelf here in New York, at retail price, that is, for sometimes even $50. That's no longer the case, but it's still not that much more, depending on the producer and the vintage, and when you're buying it in the buying cycle when the wines come out onto the market. But these are definitely much more affordable. Even your Grand Crus are usually going for the price of Village, or depending on the producer. Some producers at Ligotes go for as much as Grand Cru, Chablis, but which is ridiculous. But it's certainly a very accessible price point. You can get Chablis Grand Cru for the price of Village or maybe Premier Cru wines from the Côte d'Or.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. So, okay, why is it then that the Chablis Grand Cru are so often overlooked and all the attention is going to the Grand Cru of Bourgogne? What's your theory on that? I'm sure you have one.
I do. And I know that we only have about 30 minutes. So I will bite my tongue, but I have lots of ideas on this. First of all, I think that Chablis is a really subtle wine. And I think that when people think about Chardonnay and Bourgogne, they kind of go to the Côte d'Or. Not all Chablis has very obvious oak on it. I think people connect, Chardonnay with oak. That's not necessarily the case, especially in Chablis. We probably do on most Grand Crus Chablis Grand Crus have some portion of new oak, but it's not necessarily going to be showy new oak. And so I think that there's a disassociation. It's like, it's got to have oak and power and bigness, if you will. But Chablis is Chablis. Chablis is a very different kind of Chardonnay. So I think that that's one thing. I think that when we think about how we taste wines professionally, if we're talking about geeks and collectors and those of us in the industry, Chablis can get lost really easily in a lineup. we're going to start, you usually would go kind of north to south and tasting the wines, and you end up with the pinnacle of Chablis, a Grand Cru, and then you're probably going to, maybe with not very evident oak, and then you're going to go into a village wine, maybe, or Premier Cru wine from the Côte d'Or. And so it's going to seem like there's more to it because there's going to be more oak. You're going to have probably a little bit more viscosity, a little more body, because it may have spent more time in oak, or it's going to have a little bit higher alcohol. And in fact, Chablis often gets passed over, and it gets lost sometimes in those kinds of tastings. And then another thing that really, really bugs me, not just for Chablis Grand Cru, but for white wines in general, and especially high-end white wines, we drink the wines way too cold. Grand Cru Chablis should be drunk at, a little bit colder than cellar temperature. And I find that deeply frustrating because Chablis is a subtle wine. It is a wine of nuance. It is truly a lens between, the wine is a lens between the Chardonnay grape and Cameroonian soil. And if you pull it out of the refrigerator at whatever, 38 degrees or whatever your refrigerator is, it's going to be too cold. You're immediately masking, it's a terrible word, we should stop using that. Not yet, but you're going to be masking nuance. And so we don't see what the wines are like. It's all hidden under this cold temperature. And then finally, and I got to going a little bit too long here. Finally, I think that we have less of a habit of aging Chablis. And so we don't see what the wines can become. We see them when they're really young, but we don't know what happens when they become 5, 10, 12, 15, 20 years old, which is really a shame because most producers in Chablis, many producers, I should say, would not start touching their Les Clos until 15 years post-vintage.
Yeah. So that's great, because actually I was going to ask you about ageability of Chablis Grand Cru. You'd say that we're drinking our Chablis Grand Cru wines too young.
Yes, absolutely. Way too young. I mean, even Petit Chablis can age. I mean, you have exactly what you need, which is that strong acidic backbone. You've got spine, and of course, low pH. So you have exactly what you need, assuming that the wine is, good quality at the base, that you've got some concentration and all that. You can't just age vinegar forever. I totally agree with you.
So do you tend to go by maybe the climat when you're kind of thinking of ageability? Are you thinking climat, like Les Clos can age more than, I don't know, Blanchot, or are you going vintage, or are you cross-referencing because it's the whole picture, and then you say, okay, well, Les Clos typically can age XYZ, but from this vintage it's XYZ?
Honestly, I would first go with producer. That would be my first thing. And then I would start to look at certainly vintage, but any good producer, any great producer is going to make really good wines. And sometimes wines surprise us. They're not what we might wish for early on, but then they can turn into something really just mind-blowing and exciting down the road. Yeah. So I would go first to producer, and then to vintage, and then to climat. And of course, there's also the question of, what are the quality of the vine? So even your highest end producers are going to, sometimes replant their vines, and maybe they have a substantial portion of younger vines in a certain vintage's wine, and maybe that wine will be maybe less age-worthy for a little bit of time, for whatever it is, a decade or two, as those vines become older. So there's always that question, but I would go to producer first.
Yeah, it's interesting. Do you think that most people are accustomed to drinking older Chablis, or do they kind of know what to expect in the glass from an older Chablis?
I don't. Yeah. No, I think it's really disorienting because older Chablis. I think any older white wine can be really confusing because we start to worry, is it good quality? Is this what it's supposed to be? And when we don't have the habit of drinking them, we don't know. And so we kind of distance ourselves. Oh, maybe I expected something else. I prefer this, I'd rather drink this or what have you. Yeah. But I think people aren't familiar with it. And so they hedge their bets when they talk about drinking an older wine.
Yeah, great point. A lot of people in the industry seem to just think of the 7 Grand Crus of Chablis instead of recognizing that it is 1 hillside, 1 Grand Cru, 7 climat. Why do you think that is? Do you have a theory on that?
Yes, I think it's just confusing. I think that we think of Grand Crus from the Côte d'Or, and certainly Grand Crus from the Côte d'Or are their own thing. They're not even associated with the name of the village, which is, so it seems like it should be, whatever, that it should be Prose Grand Cru or Bugro Grand Cru, but it's Chablis Prose Grand Cru, or it's Prose Chablis Grand Cru. And Chablis is the only Grand Cru in Burgundy that has the village name appended to it. And it's simply just a force of habit, how we've talked about it all this time. And that's why we just need to start talking about it correctly.
That makes so much sense, because we are in Bourgogne, right? We are in this place where we're used to thinking of the Grand Cru as it's this individual site. And yes, when it comes to Chablis, it's like, it is Bourgogne, but it's its own entity in a way. Okay, so now, again, talking about the Chablis Grand Cru hillside, Les Clos, I feel like it gets all the limelight, it gets all the love, and everybody sort of forgets or misunderstands all the other climats. Why does Les Clos always get all the attention?
Les Clos has the textbook perfect exposition, and it has historically been, the one that was deemed the most age-worthy, the most prestigious. But it's I think that it's certainly deserved, but each one of these Grand Crus, Chablis Grand Crus, is distinctive. And with time and climate change, things are going to change a little bit. And I think that, well, Les Clos is absolutely phenomenal. I love the other Grand Crus too, for different reasons. Each of them has something different to offer.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to get into the tasting in a minute, but again, you've held so many roles as a buyer for big restaurant groups. When you're looking for a Chablis Grand Cru wine, what do you want out of that wine that you think will merit a placement of it on a list?
Well, if you're putting it on a wine list, you certainly want it to be purchased. So you need to put on, either good vintages or good producers. You want it to move. It needs to be priced at the right price point. And it also, you need to have an advocate for the wine. If someone is like, oh, I want, a white Burgundy to start dinner with, it's, if everyone's going constantly to the Côte d'Or, this wine can be overlooked. Sometimes people associate price point with quality, which, as we've talked about, the best quality of Chablis we can get in Grand Crus that are less expensive. So you need an advocate for it. You need someone who can talk about the wine and really sell it and believe in it and know the style of customer, the palate of the customer that's going to appreciate it.
As I mentioned, we've done a few of these, and I've always said, with Chablis, it's about nuance, and you mentioned that word as well, which it's like it's putting a lens to the terroir through this grape in a very unadulterated way. And there's no other place in the world that does it, but they're not showy wines. They're wines that sort of, you need to pay attention to the wine. It's not going to jump out and scream at you. Shall we go into tasting?
Why not?
All right. So as we mentioned, we have 3 wines. So the first 2 wines we'll be tasting are from the same producer. And it is Domaine Bocoré et Filles. And the first one we're tasting is from the Blanchot Grand Cru, Chablis Grand Cru Blanchot, and it is from the 2018 vintage. And again, just to remind our guests that we are in this little climat up here. All right, so I like better because you can
ISO my map as well. Because it's so hard that you can kind of see. I'm trying to figure out which is the best angle. But what's interesting is that, obviously you've got Les Clos here, and you can kind of see on this map that there is, you can see it kind of from the side. There's a huge hill, right? Blanchot is a massive hill, and it's super, super steep. And the further you go in from this road that goes along the bottom of the Grand Crus, the further you go in, the steeper it gets. So, and you can see with all these little lines here, the altitude lines, it goes up to 210 meters, but it's really, really steep. And then there's this forest up here at the top too. So while this is, kind of open and it's quite flat across the road over here, this is very hilly, and there's a forest up here. So it's really quite, the further you go up the side of the Cru, it gets much, much cooler. So it's quite a dramatic, it's dramatically different from the other Grand Crus.
And the orientation, I mean, this also has a southeastern orientation, right? So you've got it's fairly long. So you've got the difference in elevation, you've got the difference in latitude. I mean, it's, but it is significant. The soils change as you're going from the north to south. It becomes a little bit more clay heavy. As you're going further south, it's a little more rocky on the top. You've got the forest. So even within this Blanchot, right, this one climat, that's what, 1,200 to 12 hectares, you've got tremendous variation. It's a slightly trickier climat, definitely cooler than Les Clos, but it does also have this altitude. So, I mean, it's a different environment. Usually you expect kind of a real freshness and acidity from Blanchot, maybe, if you were to compare it to the Les Clos. So what do you think of this wine? Is it kind of giving you what you would expect from a Blanchot?
It is, and it's super, always useful to have a comparison. And since we have Les Clos to follow after it, and you can certainly see, I think in the texture and the breadth on the palate, the brightness of the acidity, and of course it's an 18, so there's some richness here. But I do think that it's a very good example of Blanchot, and that hilly, rocky slope. With the forest behind it. And it is really dramatic. When you just walk along the road, you can feel the temperature change, especially on a bright, sunny day.
Yeah. The acidity line is quite impressive to me. I mean, it's just so mouth watering. But there's a real kind of a white, I'm getting kind of like a waxiness and a white floral notes and white plums. And it's just so long. I mean, and that's the thing with these wines, they're never big wines, but they're so concentrated. And it's just to me, it's a lot of the length that really sort of like pulls me back into that wine. So
yeah, and certainly that the length is a signature of a Chablis Grand Cru. It's the longer the finish, the higher the quality the wine will be. And you definitely see that here. And there's that very, on the finish, to me, there's that very pretty kind of oyster shell chalkiness that is just, that's what we expect in Chablis. I think it's a very nice example.
Yeah.
And Blanchot is usually a wine that most people would say, it's going to be the first, because it's kind of this more airy, lighter style. It will be ready to drink first. But again, it really depends on the producer, because some producers are at the front of the valley. Some people are at the end of the valley. Well, it's not the end of the valley, but the end of the Cru. And people are in different parts of the slope. They have older and younger vines. So it really, and they make their wines in different ways too. So it really depends on lots of different things. So I think that Blanchot definitely is certainly of all the other Crus, probably is an earlier drinking wine, but it really depends on the producer as to how long it can go.
So in your estimation, when would you say that you would find this wine was likely to hit its peak?
Well, it is an 18. So we're certainly going to, I think, drink earlier, the vintages in general. We'll drink more quickly than our 17, which is coming up at the end of the tasting. But I mean, this is beautiful now. I understand why people would want to drink it. But this easily, give this 4 or 5 years, it will start to develop something interesting. And this is easily something that can go to 2028, 2030.
Mm-hmm. Very pretty. So in terms of the wine making, there is alcoholic and malolactic fermentation. I'm just cheating here and looking at my notes. In stainless steel tank. And then the wine spends 10 months on the lees in oak barrels, 20% of which are new. And I'm not necessarily picking, any. We're sort of talking about oak usage in even village wines from the Côte d'Or. It's not, to me, there's nothing that's really, the oak isn't necessarily defining this wine in any way, shape, or form. It's kind of
no. I often say that in Chablis, oak plays a it plays the part of kind of a like a walk-on, or someone that doesn't have a speaking role. It's an extra, if you will. Whereas in the Côte d'Or, oak tends to play a supporting role. But even in Chile, there are sometimes there are no additions for oak for certain producers. But it's very much a subtle wine, and sometimes it's really hard to differentiate between some oak use and that lees contact, which you were just mentioning, because that can give certainly a creaminess and a texture that oak can also give, and it can taste a little bit sometimes toasty or honeyed, which also we can get out of oak as well.
Yeah, it can be a little confusing. So putting on your restaurant hat, what would you maybe want to have this with?
Oh gosh, well, I mean, it is super elegant. I think that we always also think of things like along with the oysters, fish and shellfish, but there's body here, and if you put something against this that doesn't have the similar amount of body and texture, you're gonna lose the wine or the food, and with this much flavor, you're probably gonna lose the food. So I would probably go for something that's more of maybe a pork tenderloin, something that's simply cooked, maybe some fresh herbs, but something that has texture, that has some substance. Maybe not with this one. Sometimes I think of veal, but maybe not. Maybe that's a little bit too much here. So I'm going to go with a pork tenderloin for this, just nicely roasted.
So we compare it to the Les Clos?
Yes.
Fun comparison, because they do these two climats. I mean, one is right next to the other, and you'd think they were worlds apart.
Yeah. And it's even you see more color in this versus the Blanchot, same vintage, same producer, but you're definitely seeing some more color here.
So now we're in Les Clos, right? So that's kind of the big daddy climat. It's almost double any other climat in the region. Again, so right, shares a border with Blanchot, but it's pretty much due south orientation, right? But again, you do have some variation in altitude, so closer or further away from the river. So
it's a good hike up the hill, right in the middle of Les Clos. It's a good way to get your day started, get the heart pumping. It's definitely got some steepness and altitude. But one of the things about Les Clos as well is that if you really want to get geeky with someone, is that you can always ask, where is their Les Clos from? Because as May is saying, it's such a huge Chablis Grand Cru. There are kind of four parts to it, and I'm going to try to do this backwards. But there's the road that goes through the middle, yeah. And so they call this, the bottom, le bas, et le haut. So the bottom and the top, and then you've got this. So saying the path that goes up, it goes up to the orientation table. But this path, that's the hike that I was just talking about. If you want to get going in the morning, and so you've got kind of this side and that side. So you kind of have four quadrants, if you will, in the Grand Cru. So if you want to ask a producer, oh, so where are you in Les Clos, and then be like, oh, okay, that's a good question.
I mean, right off the bat, on the nose, this one is so different.
Strikingly different.
Like ripeness and more honeyed and more kind of dried, almost dried fruit. I mean, it's worlds apart for me from the Blanchot.
Yeah, and if the fruits on the Blanchot maybe were kind of more green apple-y and kind of lighter, brighter, more acidic fruits and citrusy things, and this is definitely much more of the kind of that sweet yellow apple, maybe some apricot, but something that has more lushness to it, for sure. And there's even which I often get on wines that have significant lees contact. There's kind of like a cheese rindy thing to it, yes. Which is quite fun too. And just layers and layers of complexity.
So much complexity. But again, what really kind of strikes me is always just how different these two wines are. And, it's, I always go back to this, like it's the same hillside, same grape, Kimmeridgian soil, and nuance and variation. But within that, you've got these two wines side by side, and they're really quite different. And yeah, it's a lot more. I was saying, in one of the other conversations that I tend to think of Chardonnay oftentimes with apples. It's like the green apple, the golden apple, the red apple, the overripe apple. But yeah, so to me, this is definitely more so on the golden apple. But yeah, I am definitely getting more of a ripeness. I mean, there's just, you're sensing more ripeness in this wine. So.
Yep. And what's interesting is that, of course, there's 0.5% of alcohol leeway on labels, but these both say that 13%. And while I don't feel a difference really in the alcohol between the two of them, certainly I would think that there's a little bit less in the Blanchot. The weight is significantly different. And we always do the milk comparison, but I'm definitely getting skim milk on the Blanchot and full fat milk for the Les Clos. It's much weightier.
Much weightier, yeah, and it's just like it's much more mouth-filling. Yeah, very, very.
But at the end, very similar to the Blanchot, there's just this super punch in the back of the palate of acidity. So lots of refreshment to clean up that weight. It's certainly not heavy, but you really kind of get refreshment at the end as well. Again, classic signature.
Oftentimes for me, it's like that the wine's finished with a squirt of lime and a lick of salt. It's almost like that, and it's just this pop. It's like this brightness pop, and that's what brings me back to Chablis. It's like it's my common link from whether it's Petit Chablis, Premier Cru, Grand Cru. It's that sort of common link that always brings me back home. It's this just like focus and juiciness that you get on the finish of these wines. Beautiful. I mean, I think they're both so beautiful in different ways. So again, same producer, right? 2018, same vintage, same winemaking. I mean, I was looking at the winemaking; it's basically the same. They've done malolactic on both, stainless steel, the same oak regimen on both, just very, very different wines. What would you pair this wine with? I know you said you were a little hesitant about veal on the last one. Would you go with veal here? Or?
Yeah, I could definitely do some veal cutlets, some kind of pan-fried veal cutlets, maybe a little fried sage on top. But you know what else I would really like? And I actually think this is a little bit more. Well, it's very much layered. It's really concentrated. Could really use a little more time in bottle, or just more time with the air sitting out. If I were starting with this earlier in a meal and then going to something else, I would want to come back to this and have this with some really nice Comté cheese. Just because it's really, and I mentioned that cheese rind earlier as well, but I would love to have this with some cheese. I'm very much a white wine with cheese fan.
So we're going to now shift over to our last wine. Now, I know that you were recently there visiting the lovely Nathalie and Gilles, and this is the 2017. So now we're in a different vintage, more classic vintage. And this is the Chablis Grand Cru Les Preuses. So since you have the cooler map, I'm going to let you show us on your map. So just to contextualize, in terms of the footprint, it's a little bit smaller. So plus it's a little bit smaller than Blanchot, but negligibly smaller. Different orientation though. So now we're kind of on the other side. So show us on your map. I like your map.
So Preuses is here. And Preuses is really again, it's kind of hard to figure out how to
No, that's good. That's good.
You can kind of see that there's a ridge here. Yeah. That ridge is between Vaudésir and Preuses. But it really kind of it's the vines aren't planted north, but you can see the north here. It's definitely a little bit cooler, and also probably too hard to see. But you're starting already at of course, it goes all the way down to the road. But it's a smaller portion of Preuses that is lower down. A lot of it is really quite high up on the hill, and so it's a cooler site, if you will, certainly than Les Clos with its massive impact of sun there. And of course, this is Nathalie and Gilles, and there, whereas the Vauquerets are in town here, somewhere over in here, probably. Nathalie and Gilles Fèvre are way up here outside of the town of Chablis. So that's where we are with Preuses.
And also, just to add a little bit to it, so whereas with Blanchot, we were talking about a southeastern exposure, here we're talking mostly about a southwestern exposure. So again, right, it's this different because you've got these ridges, and sometimes we don't remember that, yes, Chablis is not, I don't know, the Mosel, but it is hilly. And, you can get a workout walking up that hill. So, a range between 330 feet to 820 feet. So that's within the Grand Cru. So yes, to your point, it is a little bit more elevation. It is a slightly different orientation. So to broad stroke it, oftentimes people will say Lépreuse is kind of the more reticent one, maybe not quite as showy. If Blanchot is kind of airy and floral, and Clos is more, sort of power and elegance. Prose is a little bit more sort of you got to work a little bit harder to get in there. Maybe it's not quite as showy, but it seems to be for a lot of real kind of Chablis purists, a climat that they love. And you're smiling, so I'm guessing that category. So I know you have a lot of thoughts on this wine. So share with us some of your thoughts on this wine, Christy.
Well, May, thank you so much for this wine, especially because I love the wines from Nestlé and Gilles and their daughter Julie. But I actually had this wine at Au Fil du Zinc, a great restaurant in town in Chablis, when I was there in September. So it's really nice to see it again, because it was magic that night, and it's magic again today. But I do agree. I think that Prose is in a really interesting place, because it's got fantastic exposure. It's got some cooler air coming in from the north, but as you said, it's kind of southwest, very different exposure, and it's higher. Most of it is higher up. So you get intensity with freshness. And personally, Prose it's definitely up there as in terms of my favorite climat of the Chablis Grand Cru.
One of the words that I came back to oftentimes with these wines is tension. And there's just this beautiful tension in this wine. It's just like, the acidity is there. I mean, the acidity is there in all of these wines, but there's, again, to reiterate the same word I just said 3 times, there's a tension to this wine that I wasn't necessarily getting in the others. And yes, it's maybe not quite as open, but it really pulls you in, and it's just so complex. And
Yeah, there's power, and of course, this is we're looking at different vintages and different producers and different climat. But whereas on the Les Clos, it was kind of like the wine kind of comes in and makes itself comfortable, sits on your palate, and then as you swallow it, it kind of cleans up and brightens up at the end. And it's certainly balanced the whole time. But this is kind of like the impact of everything. It's weight, it's concentration, it's acidity, and it's like, whoa, it's this dynamo of everything. And it's kind of like it's vibrating. It's like doing something on your palate. It's active.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. A really, really wonderful wine. I mean, I have to say, it's also 2017. So two very different vintages.
What I really like about Chablis in general is that even with climate change, the vintages are still very, very dramatically different. And just because you have an early harvest doesn't mean that it's a hot year. Like we had in last year in 2020, it was an early harvest because the season started early. But of course it was also warm. But so you get very, very different styles of wine every single year, which is great because there's something for everyone. Whether you're drinking Petit Chablis or Grand Cru Chablis, there's something for everyone from all the different vintages. And if if you're like the acid and the crunchy stuff, great, you've got vintages. If you like something that's creamier, smoother, easier going, more lush, fantastic. There's something there. There's something there for you too. So that's one of the things I absolutely love.
All right. So in terms of, you said you were enjoying this wine with dinner. What were you having at dinner with this wine?
Well, it was, actually that's an interesting question, because we had it over, the I don't know, 8 or 9 courses, however many courses you have at Fil du Zinc. And so we went from, shellfish and light, delicate things.
Yeah.
And we did start with a glass of champagne, but we were still on the fish items. And then we went up into meat. And I think that's one of those things that we expect that when we're in Germany or Austria, you can have, red meat, or dense dishes with white wines. We forget about that when we go to France, which is crazy, but you can absolutely, there's a very savory spiciness to the wine. And certainly that leasiness, I think, is also quite savory. So you can also go into, kind of meatier dishes with this as well.
Yeah. I was looking at also like the in terms of the winemaking. So alcoholic and malolactic fermentation in small stainless steel tanks, 30% of them in barrel. And then there's 6 months on the lees and stainless steel. So, I mean, in terms of winemaking, there's not a lot of winemaking, as I say, it's oftentimes it's a little bit of oak barrel, maybe, mostly lees would be the one kind of tool you may find yourself using. But, yeah, I mean, again, we're sort of going back to this idea of just the Chardonnay grape marrying the terroir, marrying the vintage in the mostly unadulterated way that you can get.
What's fascinating to me is that when we think about oak and Chardonnay and making wine, we think about vinifying in oak and then aging in oak. And so many producers in Chablis don't do that. They actually tend to vinify in stainless steel. And of course, there are definitely exceptions. And then they'll age the wine in oak, which is because they just want the tension and the freshness in the wine. And that's also one of the reasons that you see so much older oak in Chablis. And a lot of producers, they'll season their oak, maybe they'll throw it in a bigger cuvee, like a Chablis cuvee, and then they'll use it for their Grand Cru for the second wine or something, Chablis Grand Cru for the second wine. But Chablis has a very careful relationship with oak, because most of the producers will say, most tonneliers or most barrel makers, they make barrels for Chardonnay. They don't make barrels for Chablis. So they're very, very careful with that winemaking with regard to oak.
There are many Chardonnays in the world, but there's only one Chablis.
Right. Thank goodness.
Christy, this was amazing. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for asking me.
A lot of amazing information and richness to this discussion. So I really appreciate your time, your know-how, your knowledge, and making yourself available to do this. This was really fun. Cheers to you.
Excellent. Merci. It was a pleasure. Thank you, May.